Well, Dave, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
One of the things that's happening globally is this explosion in people who are age 50 plus.
Yes.
It just seems I can't pick up a newspaper or listen to a television show or a news report that they're not talking about the explosion in this age group. What do you think about this?
Well, we used to make fun of aging and retirement, and now it's cool to be old because there are simply quite a lot of older people, and they happen to be called baby boomers, children who are born after World War II, and they're now reaching their retirement age. George Bush, as a matter of fact, he turned 60 last year. So there's a lot of talk about these boomers are going to live longer, they're going to be better off financially, and they'll be more active in retirement. So they're popular. They're people that businesses want to get to know and what they would like, their preferences. The cosmetic industry, housing, travel, and it goes on and on and on. Boomers are big business.
And in Michigan, they seem to be the fastest growing segment.
Yes.
Now, obviously, I'm a member of that group also,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of my colleagues, they don't want to be called seniors.
Yeah.
Do you hear the same thing?
I don't think people want to be called anything, because that's where we fall into the trap of thinking, what does an older person want, or what does a boomer want, or what have you. People like to be treated personally. They don't want to be categorized and say, this is the place where you should live, this is how you should travel. They want to live life on their own terms as an individual.
And I think that's probably important, that they're just continuing what they had done in an earlier stage.
Absolutely. A wonderful example of that is Maggie Kuhn. When she was alive, she was 80 some years old, and she formed a group called the Gray Panthers. And these were advocates that would go after people like Johnny Carson, who would make fun of Aunt Blatty and things of this nature. And people said, well, did she get involved in politics when she got old? And no, she was involved in the women's labor movement all her life. And in later life, she simply continued that as a passion to advocate for those people in need.
So you see it, I remember when I was studying some basic psychology in my background, and they talked about the disengagement theory versus the activity theory.
Yes.
And I see many more of us going the activity theory.
Yes.
Meaning we may substitute what we had done in the past, but we kind of try to keep the same level of activity. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think people don't, there's no such thing as an aging personality. Someone might have difficulty with hearing or driving skills, and that might limit their behavior in some way. But inside, they still have the same picture of themselves. If you look at commercials, they usually depict older people as 10 years younger than they actually are. And the reason for that is that you and I and everybody else doesn't see themselves as an older person. So if you want to sell or you want to relate to these individuals, they have people that are younger than you that supposedly are what you think you look like.
I can relate to that. Sometimes I think of my inner self, that's a certain age, but I look in the mirror and I'm another age.
Yeah. But now it's cool to be old because you look at Sean Connery. He's
Yes.
really a tough guy, and he always gets the girl in the end. And then we have this new Indiana Jones coming
Harrison
out.
Ford.
Space Cowboys with Clint Eastwood, astronauts who are 70. And so we have this celebration of people who are now free of the responsibilities of mortgage, a day-to-day job, small children, and now they can really take the risk. I think it was the Bucket List that Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. And so now people are looking at aging as a third part of their life. What's the next step?
Well, in your most recent book, Youth in Your Life, which I think you did in 2005,
Yes.
you talked about the necessity to look at age as a composite of things.
Yes.
In other words, we need exercise, aerobic
Yes.
exercise. We need, I think, what's the new word that you use? Neurobics.
Neurobics.
Okay.
Yes.
You want to talk about that one a little bit?
Oh, sure. It's interesting that about 75% of what happens to somebody as they get into the 6th and 7th decade has nothing to do with the normal aging process. It has to do with things such as exercise, getting it or not,
Right.
Nutrition and diet, and maintaining an interest in your life. And so what we found is that people are now taking more charge of their lives because we understand that what we thought was inevitable really was a stereotype. You're old, you get tired, you start to become isolated. And we found this simply isn't the case for people who are free to pursue their goals, like a Maggie Kuhn, like a Clint Eastwood, like a Sean Connery, like an Indiana Jones, that when people do have the means and the opportunity, they'll continue to pursue their life. And so now we've discovered something, that it's a choice. And it was very apropos of the theme that you chose for today's program. And that whole theme was that, you know, it's a new beginning. This is an opportunity. Stop acting your age and start living your life, for heaven's sakes.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's what we're talking about, is forget about the old stereotypes and let's talk about you and what you'd like to do with this growing third of your life, because in 1900 you might have lived in retirement years for about 15 months. And today the average retiree lives 15 to 18 more years. And that's a whole generation, a whole lifetime. What are you going to do that's going to get you excited about life and up and dressed every day and feeling good about yourself?
And that's so important. In our local area, we've been kind of a manufacturing base up until this point. And we've had a lot of people who have retired early, you know, 30 years and out.
Yes.
And so we have people in their early 50s who probably have, we hope, 40 years or thereabouts to still live.
Yeah.
And some of those people didn't plan ahead. And now they're looking at second careers, or they're looking at part-time jobs. Do you think that's just a local thing, or is this happening?
No, it's actually national and actually global, because the working population, the population behind the baby boomers, is actually decreasing in size and the older population is increasing. At the same time, we have people who are retiring that simply need a little more income,
Right.
a part-time job, a flex job. That's a very big industry. So what industry needs is now what 78 million baby boomers want, and so it's very compatible. The expectation is that people will continue to work at something they find interesting, stimulating, and engaging. And so now you have some people returning to college. My father only had a 6th grade education. He was an immigrant, but when he retired at 55, he went back and got his GED. Then after that, he started going to the community college. Many people always wanted to go to college. Education was very important, and they did it for their children. And now
Good point.
that it's their turn. They don't have to pay the mortgage anymore. That's paid off. The kids are on their own, and so now it's really their time.
Good point. In fact, Delta has recognized the need for us to provide more programs for seniors. And although some seniors don't like to be called seniors, we're going to call our program the 50 plus, just like gold. And certainly there's going to be an element to careers in there. Sometimes it's referred to in the media as encore careers.
Yes.
You know, just like applause.
Yes.
This is your chance to have an encore.
Or my second season, some people will call it.
Like that.
Yeah.
That's good. And we're also looking at doing things like one-day college and travel, because one of the things that we think is going on with seniors is we can't pigeonhole them. They're not all the same. Would you agree?
Exactly. Oh, that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, someone asked Michelangelo once, how was it possible for one sculptor to create so many statues? And Michelangelo said, well, he imagined that the figures already existed inside the stone, and he just took his hammer and chisel and he freed them from their encasement. And that's what we have to use as a metaphor for today's retiree. We don't need to create a senior citizen program, whatever that is, because they're so diverse. What we need to do is find out what are some of the blocks or challenges or barriers that keep people from living their life. Sometimes they think they're too old to go to school. They need to know that that's not true.
That's right.
Sometimes they feel they want to work but feel they should be retired, and they have the option to continue working. And so what we try to do is find out, why is it that you're acting your age, whatever that is, or what are you supposed to be like at that age? And we're telling them, let's give you the supports. If you need transportation, you get transportation. If it's income, then maybe there's sliding scale or audit in the courses. And so that's a whole opposite, a 180-degree turn in programming for what we'd call the older population or senior population. And that is letting them to be individual in their pursuit of things, just removing the barriers rather than saying, here's a senior citizen program that's based on something that we think is what you want, and let us pigeonhole in that. And a lot of people have said, just say no to that pigeonhole people programs.
And it's not only providing them some financial gain by going back to school as a possibility for careers, But there's that whole socialization aspect. It's the aspect also of learning.
Yes.
And as you would say, neurobics,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there are secondary benefits to this.
Oh, yes. To exercise, the old adage, use it or lose it, applies to our body, applies to our intellect as well. Neurobics is a new term, and it has to do with exercising your mind. We found that AARP some 20 years ago was doing research, and they found that people who continued to exercise their mind through reading, learning, and thinking, they had less of a memory decline than those who didn't.
Good point.
Now, some people do have some organicity. They do have what we call age-related memory loss. But for the most part, most of that might be due to hypertension. It could be forgetfulness based on poor nutrition, or an iron deficiency, or congestive heart. The whole point is that we want people to know that if you continue to exercise your mind, musicians continue to create music and compose. This is why we have found that people who learn an instrument, learn a new language, in other words, use those skills, they have a 25 to 30% decreased risk of dementia.
In fact, that was one of the factors that you used in this, what you called the death calculator.
Oh, yeah.
The one
Get
that the
people's
media has
attention.
picked up on.
Right.
And so that was one of the factors. And you've done some great work, and the media has picked up on it with the death calculator, where you've taken some rock stars, you've taken some movie stars, Oprah would be one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And based upon lifestyle and genetics
Yes.
and nutrition and activity levels, you've predicted how long that they'll likely live, right?
Yes, and it's a prediction, it's an estimate. But what I did is I said, there's so much being published in medical journals. They'll say, if you drink too much coffee, that might reduce your life. If you smoke, that might take off some years if you're overweight. So I was able to incorporate this and said, let's apply it to people who pay attention to public figures. And that's why when we look at Keith Richards or Madonna, Rolling Stones, and Ozzy Osbourne, people follow those. Lindsay and this new lady, what's her name? Amy Winehouse, and they make great music.
Self-destructive
But they're
behaviors.
self-destructive, and so they are at risk because of their lifestyle. And that's exactly the same thing that we're saying on a smaller scale, someone who might retire and not exercise, not eat, not go out, not exercise their mind. In a sense, that's the same kind of erosion of life expectancy that you'd see in someone who is careless, like the rock stars are.
And what would you say is the contributing factor that attitude has when it comes to people 50 plus as far as aging?
Attitude is what we call a precursor to making a decision. In other words, if I look at the glass as half full or half empty, then that is going to lead me to decide that if the glass is half empty, I may as well sit back, or the glass is half full. And so how we think actually creates a picture of hope or purpose or a sense of future. There are some people who won't buy another pair of shoes because they say, I won't live long enough to wear them out. So automatically the glass is half empty, and so they say, why should I go out? Why should I make new friends? Somebody else might say, gosh darn it, I've got another 30 years and I'm not going to waste it. It's not going to be this time for the kids or the grandkids or anything like that. It's going to be for me. And I'm going to become maybe a writer, a photographer. I'm going to become a traveler. That's why it's so important to plan, to have the financial foundation to live the kind of life that you want.
I really appreciate having the opportunity to reconnect with you, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
You were here formerly at Delta College in your earlier professional days, 75 to 82.
Yeah.
And it's great to have you back. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And if you were to just kind of summarize all that you've learned about aging, what's the one thing you'd like to say to people out there that's really important to them?
It really is your choice. 75% of aging is a result of your lifestyle. You have a lot of control. So I say, forget all the stereotypes, stop acting your age, and start living your life. And retirement, what better time than retirement to stop acting your age and really live that life you want?
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.